All right, in this discussion, I want to talk to you a little bit about um, an alternative way that you can think about the painting assignment. Um, there are some other tutorials about how you can do stuff. There are other examples. This is another example that is, I want to make sure that people understand that when I say representational, if you were to look at the assignment page, you would see that one of the requirements is that you need to make something that's representational art. Okay, and um, representational is basically something that um, means that it's recognizable for what the object purports to be, right? So a banana is recognizable as a banana, a human figure is recognizable as a human figure, and so on. Now, that being said, you can slightly abstract some of those forms and still have it be representational. It doesn't have to be photorealistic. That's not what representational means. So I want to show you an alternative way of looking at what you might consider something to be as representational. So for instance, on this example page, or excuse me, on this assignment page, this example is quite representational actually. All right, this is one of the examples and I sort of walk you through a tutorial of how to do that. Um, and it doesn't really use brushes a whole lot, but you can still achieve that effect, a painterly effect that way. And if you were to look down at the bottom of the page too, this is another one. All right, again, representational. It's clearly a sky, clearly some shoes, even though you can sort of see through the shoes. There's a sort of like daydreamy quality, right? Clearly legs, grass, all right, and so on. Now, I want to show you something else that I would also consider for the purposes of this assignment to be representational. So here's an example of something where you clearly have a set of gears, representational, and you start to assemble or interpret in your mind, in your mind's eye, I guess, that this is an eyeball, right? That this is an eye, and that this is sort of like a gear turning eyes. And then, this is peeling paint, but it sort of also represents the shape of an eye, and you see eyelashes, right? This would also be, even though it's a little abstracted, this would also be considered representational for the purposes of this assignment. And so one of the things that I wanted to kind of walk you through, I'm not going to walk you through like I did on the other one on exactly how to do everything, but I want to just like walk you through my creative approach to coming up with something like this. Let's take a look at sort of how I arrived at this in terms of my creative process. So if I go to my Finder, one of the things that I'd done and that I continue to do is I a lot of times will just go and I'll go to different stock photo sites that are free, that generally it's from stuff that people just shoot with their own cameras, or I'll take my own pictures and I start to collect a compendium kind of like, let me show you, for instance, one of the things I do on my hard drive is I keep a file or a folder called design resources, and inside of that I have a whole bunch of different design resources that I keep that I compound and collect over the years. And in images, here's just a sample of some of them. Like I'll categorize them, right? You could also do this like in iPhoto or whatever else. I just happen to do it this way because I've done it this way for a long time. And so I will a lot of times go look through the stuff that I've already collected, but then I'll also a lot of times if I know I need something specific, I'll go to the web or I'll go to my own camera or whatever. And I really do, even though this is not a photography class, I strongly encourage you, almost everybody nowadays has a smartphone that can take pretty decent pictures. Even, an iPhone 4 is considered sort of an older phone now, and even those take reasonably decent pictures, especially if you have the sort of the higher end iPhone 4, right? And we're already up to iPhone 7, all right? And Android cameras typically, Android phones typically have cameras that have exquisite resolution. So I would encourage you to, sort of go out in the world and just take pictures of things, especially if you have an idea of what you want to use. Now, to give you an idea, I started looking through stuff, and one of the pictures that sort of really piqued my interest, um, was this photograph of gears. Even though it's a little bit, it's a little blurry, that's okay, because also, if you think about it, this is a painterly assignment, okay? Um, and so I, I liked the idea of this because it really represented to me sort of this feeling of an eye, and it gave me this feeling of like thinking about sort of like the ghost in the machine, that concept of um, technology and its relationship to humans and whatever. And it doesn't mean that that's where it has to end up. And it even like sort of reminded me a little bit of the movie Metropolis, if you've seen that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can look it up. It's actually pretty interesting. So this is where I started, and it made me think of an eye. And so I went, actually, I didn't have any pictures of eyes, and I decided to go to the web and see if I could find something I felt was suitable. And if I didn't, then I probably would have taken my own pictures with my smartphone of someone's eye. So here's the here's one of the eyes that I found, and actually, this is one of the first ones that I found, and there were a lot of really interesting photographs. But one of the things that was sort of important to me is that the eye had to kind of, at least to some degree, be oriented in the same way that this one was. And you can see kind of like the perspective. And if you were to look at the vanishing point on this, you would see that the horizon line is somewhere like here, because this object recedes this way, and then from the bottom it recedes this way, and you can see that they would meet somewhere in the ballpark of this space, right? And so that was important. Now, I I looked at this and I kind of tried to mess around with this one, but it was a little too straight on and it was distorting it just way too much. Plus also, it doesn't get the full pupil, or excuse me, not pupil, it doesn't get the full iris of the eye. It sort of, this sort of cuts it off just a little bit. And if you notice, if you look at the gear, it is the full iris. So that means that the eye would be wide open, like something that's very intense. And so I came across this one after looking a whole lot, and this one actually seemed pretty suitable. Now it's looking in exactly the opposite direction, but that's not a big deal because I could flip it. The other thing too that I really liked is the these blood vessels. And the other thing too that I had actually sort of thought about, and I'd already decided before I even found this picture, was I saw a picture that I have in my own set of downloads that I've kept over the years of this tree, and it reminded me very much of capillaries or blood vessels. And so I had pulled that one out too. I ended up not using this one, but it was a resource that I thought about. So I decided so far on the gears and this eye, which I could flip. And then I thought also it would be really important, maybe if you look at the eye, I thought this is pretty desaturated. It might be fine the way it is, but depending on what I wanted, I might want something that was also sort of that felt like water that was also saturated. And so I had this in my set of stock stuff, and I thought that potentially could add some really like lovely saturation and texture. There was another water one that I found, which is this, and I did end up using both of these water ones, and I show you how in a little bit. Okay. And then also to sort of give it this sort of brooding feel, because that's kind of the word that I guess I'd be going for with something like gears and a sort of paranoid looking eye. Um, I wanted some texture, and I came across this as actually one of the textures that I had downloaded a long time ago that I thought was, somewhat attractive and interesting to look at. It has like a lot of depth and layers to it. You can see that just over time, the way that this thing was painted was pretty incredible. On this wall, and how it had been scrubbed back and scrubbed off. And so I thought that this could also be good because if you look at the way that this shape is, it's almost like the shape of an eye. And so I thought that it could be interesting to work with that shape as well. And then I thought that this, again, this opening, same thing, that it would be able to help reveal a little bit more. Okay. Um, yeah, and those are all of the resource files that I thought I would start with using.